often the research is kind of mixed with regards to the benefits of creatine on endurance performance. So we do know that if you take creatine, similar to carbohydrate, if you pull it into the muscle, it does pull a little bit of water into the muscle and it can increase body weight. And so that can have potentially a detrimental effect on some endurance performance. So yeah, you don't want to be carrying an extra 1 or 2 pounds with you when you're trying to, run a marathon, for example. But there is some certain situations where creatine, I think, can be a benefit. For example, for maybe non-weight bearing endurance events like cycling, there has been some evidence. There was a pretty cool study that was done by Louise Burke at the Australia Institute of Sport. And they did a 120 kilometer time trial in elite cyclists. And what they did was every 10 kilometers, they alternated between a 1 kilometer burst where they tried to do that 1 kilometer as fast as possible, and then they'd continue on. And then at the next 10 kilometer interval, they had to do 4 kilometers as quickly as possible. And they alternated that back and forth for 120 kilometers.
That sounds awful. But anyway,
Yeah,
carry on.
horrible, horrible.
Yeah.
And what they found was at the end, the last 1 and 4 kilometer bursts were done at a higher power output in the group that combined creatine and carbohydrates compared to just carbohydrates alone. So there is some evidence that creatine can help those higher bursts of activity throughout endurance events. There's also a swimming study where they showed the last 50 meters of a 400-meter race was done faster with creatine supplementation. So it might help that finishing burst as well. So yeah, I think there's kind of key moments in endurance events where creatine can play a role. But overall, if you just do kind of time to exhaustion test or continuous exercise at a certain power output, I don't think creatine plays a major role in those particular events. It's primarily using other energy systems that are more important. The mitochondria, the oxidative aerobic energy system is much more important for those events.
That's super helpful to help clarify that. I'm also really interested in the effect of creatine on the brain, and I know that you've been posting about that and thinking about that quite a bit. So, as so many people are fascinated by brain health and brain function, and creatine clearly plays potentially a role there. I'd love your thoughts and your thinking in that area too.
Yeah, for sure. So your brain uses a ton of energy. So about 20% of your daily energy, despite being relatively small in mass relative to the rest of your body. So it's only 2% of your body mass, but it uses 20% of your total daily energy. And so it requires a ton of energy. And as I mentioned previously, the creatine energy system supports that higher intensity type exercise. But in your brain, you have moments where there's a lot of stress, maybe sleep deprivation, mental fatigue, or in science, they've done hypoxia, for example, which is just providing a low amount of oxygen. It's going to stress your brain as well. But in those situations, it seems like creatine supplementation can actually reduce some of the negative effects of those situations on cognitive performance. So, for example, if you're sleep deprived, your cognition typically goes down. So if you didn't get a really good sleep and you're trying to focus and write a test, your performance is not going to be very good. But if you take creatine, it negates a lot of those negative effects of sleep deprivation, at least over the short term. So I'm not suggesting that somebody doesn't need to sleep anymore because they can just take this dietary supplement. But over the short term, yeah, it can negate some of those negative effects of sleep.
Got it. Short-term bridge, not a long-term fix.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's important.
Do you feel like it might have any impact on cognition? So let's say you have a knowledge worker, they're, thinking all day long, they're trying to do difficult tasks, they're presenting, they're crunching numbers, they're like working, cognitively. There's a significant amount of cognitive stress. Is it potentially beneficial for someone who is a cognitive athlete?
Absolutely. So there's a pretty cool study uh, that looked at creatine supplementation following mental fatigue. And so the way that they induce this mental fatigue, it's called the Stroop task. So essentially, there's like these words that are shown on the screen, and they're either like blue, green, red, orange, and sometimes the color of the word matches the actual word, and other times they don't match the word. And you need to say like the actual color that you see and not the. So you need to ignore what the word says sometimes. So it's this cognitive challenge for the brain to do it quickly, and so they had to do that for 90 minutes. And what they found was that the creatine group, so those that took creatine supplementation, were better at that task at the end of it compared to the placebo group. So it shows basically that creatine can help maintain your mental capacity during those mentally fatiguing tasks. So yeah, I think about you know maybe professors or people doing podcasts, or maybe more importantly, maybe medical doctors that need to be focused, especially when they're sleep deprived, but also have that cognitive tasks as well, or a variety of other populations can benefit: firefighters, police officers, things like that.
That's really helpful, just because so much of my audience are those knowledge worker types, and I know that they're interested in high performance and don't want to make mental mistakes. So if this can give them that 1% edge, that's also really helpful. There's been, in addition to this interest in creatine for exercise training and the interest in creatine for the brain, there's also been significant interest in creatine for aging. And if I'm not mistaken, you published a meta-analysis, I think back in 2021, also 2022 potentially, where you looked at this at creatine potentially being able to help us through aging and for older adults. Can you tell us a little bit about creatine and aging?
Absolutely, yeah. So we've done quite a few reviews on creatine supplementation in aging populations. So similar to younger individuals, it's also an effective supplement. Our most recent systematic review and meta-analysis was published in 2024, but we found that creatine can make the muscles a little bit bigger. We actually show an increase in what's called lean body mass or lean tissue mass. So that's basically, yeah, if you measure with a DEXA, for example, that's a tool to measure changes in body composition. It's measuring lean mass, and lean mass, a part of that is actually muscle mass. So about 50% of it is. So oftentimes we'll show, for example, like a 1.1 kilogram or 1.3 kilogram increase in lean mass with creatine supplementation combined with exercise, compared to the placebo. So it seems like creatine's having this really big effect. People are like, oh, you're going to gain over a kilogram of muscle. And I'm like, no, half of that is muscle. So it's still having an effect, but yeah, it's definitely smaller than what people suggest. And then we also showed that it can improve upper body strength in older adults as well. So that's great. And then our most recent systematic review actually showed no benefit on lower body strength,
Hmm.
which we did previously. So I'm not too sure why there's upper and lower body differences, but yeah, that's our most recent systematic review.
If you had an older parent, would you put them on it?
Definitely. Yeah. So
All right.
yeah, so it has a small effect, but it can not only can it improve their muscle mass and their strength, but it can also improve their functionality too. And so the way that we actually assess functionality is a sit to stand performance. So just your ability to sit down and stand up multiple times in 30 seconds gives us a really good idea of kind of your activities of daily living. And creatine supplementation can definitely help that as well.